So, a lot of people in the anti-SJW sphere, or world, or whatever you want to call it, I guess you could say I fall into that category myself, but anyway, a lot of people in this anti-SJW thing have already talked a lot about this, including people who I know at least read comics, or like comic book films, or comic book characters. But I'm not sure I've actually seen an active comic book reading girl make a video on it yet. At least I don't think Comic Book Girl 19 has. So I thought, why the heck not? A little over a week ago, Marvel's Vice President of Sales, David Gabriel, reported that after discussing the state of Marvel with a roundtable of retailers to ICV2, we saw the sales of any character that was diverse, any character that was new, our female characters, anything that was not a core Marvel character, people were turning their nose up against. That was difficult for us because we had a lot of fresh, new, exciting ideas that we were trying to get out and nothing really worked. This statement immediately caused an outrage from the social justice types who were appalled that someone who, as VP of sales, you could probably infer knows a thing or two about Marvel Comics sales, would be so bold as to even imply maybe diversity for diversity's sake isn't very profitable. Of course, the anti-SJWs were busy lying on their backs in laughter. Plenty of feminists, social justice warriors, and all manner of lefties were quick to jump into Marvel's defense ring to explicate that Marvel's sales aren't in the tank because of diversity. No, that's not the real case. Gabriel himself walked back his statement by noting that several new characters are quite popular and listed off the following: Squirrel Girl, Miss Marvel, the Mighty Thor, Spider-Gwen, Miles Morales, and Moon Girl. And woo! Gee, how hilarious it is that his starting point there was Squirrel Girl, which is intolerable, has always been intolerable, and has always sold like shit. But anyway, also in his retraction, he noted that new characters weren't going anywhere, and that this displeasure with diversity was about the changes to core characters, not about diversity itself. News outlets that covered the controversy, and when it comes to comic books, folks, let me tell you, if you thought video games were bad in terms of PC policing, you ain't seen nothing yet. Anyway, many outlets were quick to point out that in February, The Mighty Thor, starring this obnoxious gender swap, Invincible Iron Man, starring this less obnoxious gender and palette swap, and Black Panther, starring the same old prince of a technological utopia and isolationist African nation as just about, if not every other single book with the same name since 1966 has, are all in Marvel's top 10 list for superhero comics. Don't you see? Since these diverse characters' books are selling in the top 10, clearly the problem isn't diverse characters. It's the yucky, mean white males that aren't buying enough comics featuring their own white males. Basically, diversity rules, white men drool, fucking pedantic, horrible shit. Ugh. Look, except here's the problem with that entire argument. Of those top 10 books, as I said, there were 3, quote, diverse books among the top 10. 2 of them sold less than 40,000 copies, and the third, The Mighty Thor, barely managed to break that 40K mark, coming in as the second best-selling superhero book on Marvel's shelves, 20,000 copies below The Amazing Spider-Man, starring Peter Parker, and not his actually fairly likable color swap. Before Secret Wars, the last big Marvel multiverse-bending, pointless, banal, and ultimately totally meaningless crossover event that I certainly didn't read because I never read banal and ultimately totally meaningless crossover events, Marvel's top 10 books sold over 50,000 copies, every single one of them. Now, as I said, there is exactly one superhero book selling that much, and it's dang Spider-Man, which always sells well no matter how much you muck it up. I mean, Slott, the guy currently writing Spider-Man, so if you pick up a Spider-Man comic today, it's this guy writing it. Just a few years ago, he wrote a widely despised story that involved Dr. Octopus trading consciousness with Petey and running around New York City calling himself Superior Spider-Man and shouting, "The die is cast!" and essentially kind of just becoming the Punisher. Spider-Man sold well after freaking Joe Quesada, that little weasel, put out a now infamous storyline called One More Day. If all of that shit can happen to Spider-Man, and people will still continue to read Spider-Man. There is nothing you can do to Spider-Man that will ever place his book under the top 10. Sorry for going on that little tangent, but it does actually have a point. A lot of different types of people buy comics and read comics for a lot of different types of reasons. One thing that is common, though, is for some readers to buy titles based on the character's name that is in the title, because that character is someone they love, and they are inherently okay with the ups and downs of storylines as long as they can see what Thor or Iron Man is up to this month. That's why Spider-Man always sells. Some readers will pick up Invincible Iron Man or Mighty Thor, or I guess in that case Journey into Mystery, because they always buy Iron Man and Thor comics, and because they love that character, even if currently the character has been replaced. At least in my experience, people who buy like this, they tend to be, sort of old school readers who still want to find out what's going on, but won't stop just because the title has a different specific character under the beloved title. And that's because Marvel and DC have been doing this shit for forever. The problem is, what's currently happening is just egregious, and it's not about passing on the cowl as it has been in the past. Instead, it's about disrespecting fan-favorite characters. It's about shoving in pointless and worthless and nonsensical social justice gibberish and embracing tokenism for tokenism. There are tons of examples of how this has been done correctly in the past and how no one gave a shit. But Marvel's sales are tanking all over the place, because it's not about the titular title character as much as it is about the writing. Which is why for pretty much everyone outside of those who, as I said, will just pick up any issue if it has their favorite character in the title, and the very, very rare social justice warrior who manages to wander into a comic shop and actually spend money on these books, people have stopped buying Marvel comics, and overall, their sales have hemorrhaged, not because of diversity, but because of writing. What I mean by all that is this. Comic fans, we're actually pretty accepting of characters trading and passing on their monikers, and it's indicative to me that social justice warriors and feminists and the like, how they like to make such a big deal about this new, quote, diversity in Marvel being so great and unheard of, that if all new, all different Marvel gives them that impression that this is new, then they've never read a freaking long ongoing comic run in their dang lives. And that really is the issue here, isn't it? The people that this is marketed for do not read comics. For example, a few years ago now, Marvel and these same lunatics made a huge deal that Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel, is now finally Captain Marvel. Wowee! Finally a female Captain Marvel, girl power, go women, yay! That's nice. Except ladies, you're a little bit, 30 years late to the party. This on the screen, folks. This is Monica Rambeau. She is the second Captain Marvel. Do you notice anything interesting about Monica, other than the fact that she is a woman? Oh yes, she's black. She was the second Captain Marvel, and she was Captain Marvel in 1982. But Aiden, nobody knows who that is. Plus, that happened forever ago, and clearly she wasn't still Captain Marvel in 2011, all because the mean, evil, white male comic fans wanted their white male Marvel back. And sure, I will capitulate. Monica Rambeau is a D-list character. But Captain Marvel himself, in terms of a title, that's kind of a C-list character. In terms of popularity, for most people who are not really into comics, wouldn't know that name. They wouldn't be aware of it. I mean, for fuck's sake, I doubt any of these people who are complaining about this kind of stuff know who Gensis Vel, Phyla Vel, another woman, or even Marvel himself are. They just know the name Captain Marvel because they were told to know it. Also, this is all confounded for the general public because this is also Captain Marvel. He is a totally unrelated DC character. Captain Marvel is a very convoluted IP. But now I've also seen a lot of praise from these same people for the new Miss Marvel comic, and that is starring Kamala Khan, a teenage Muslim girl, and has been nominated for a Hugo Award and has pretty good sales. Not just for a new character, but in general. And hey, that's because it's actually a pretty cute teen book, for the first part. And secondly, because a pile of dog shit is more interesting than Carol Danvers when it comes to being Miss Marvel. So, the bar for that character, in terms of a Miss Marvel title, is set pretty low. But this, friends, this is how I know that these people who like to blog and write about this stuff don't know anything about comic books, because otherwise they would be aware of the amount of times that minority or female characters had not just been featured in Marvel comics, but have become actually quite loved. Three very prominent examples at DC are the form of Jon Stewart, Kyle Rayner, and Jaime Reyes. A black man, an Asian man, and a Latino boy, respectively, all of whom are very well-liked characters who replace an existing character, as well as new characters who did, in fact, take a while to find their fan base. But these are characters that people ultimately wanted to stick around. When I see online polls of people's favorite Green Lantern, Jon Stewart is very frequently listed as the most beloved Green Lantern, particularly after his role in the Justice League animated cartoon. Additionally, Kyle Rayner, who got really screwed out of his limelight for years because the heads at DC wanted to, get this, push the classic white character of Hal Jordan over Kyle. Jaime also got a bit screwed because after a great run in 2006, as DC decided to take him from a normal kid in a very abnormal situation, namely suddenly having a nuclear-capable alien piece of tech with a mind of its own fused to his spine, who also just happened to be a Latino boy, they changed him from that to a Spanglish-spewing spaz in the New 52.
Whoa, slow down, hermano.
But hey, my point is this. All three of those characters were the race-swapped versions of previous white characters that were adored by fans, and fans still liked them. There have always been women and minorities in comics without readers caring, really at all, as long as the character wasn't based on their diversity status alone. For example, The Authority is an excellent series that had an openly gay couple, Apollo and Midnighter, since 2000, and there was neither extreme outrage nor extreme baseless praise for that. It was just a good comic, and people read it because it was good. Now, as I briefly mentioned, new IPs never perform well at first, because old school favorites will always take precedence. But as I also said, some people will buy comic books pretty much exclusively for the title on the cover. A lot of people aren't willing to spend 4 buckaroos on a 24-page comic that might just not interest them enough in a new character. These days, I don't read Marvel or DC very much, although DC is really making Marvel look pathetic in terms of comics, and I'll get a little bit more into that at some point. Since as such, I mostly read indies. The way that I decide how to read a comic, or if I want to read a comic, is if the premise seems interesting, but most importantly, if I know the writer is one of quality. And I, and probably most comic book readers, we're looking for a good tale with appeasing art as an extra bonus. The push for these diversity-hire characters isn't concerned with the writing, however. It's concerned with a social justice or politically correct narrative. So Marvel's looking at a lot of new characters with slapped-on pathetic PC schlock, and anyone is surprised when this forced faux diversity is flushing sales across the board down the turd flume? Somebody at Marvel knows how stupid this is, and that's what makes it more weird. Launching a whole bunch of titles, over 100 new titles in the last 2 years, 40 of which have been cancelled, is another really great way to drive your readers away, for example. Like I said, comic books are an investment. Only a few dollars at first, sure, but that quickly compounds when you're making a pull list. And speaking of pull lists, when you keep adding titles up every month, readers have to update their lists if they want to read it. As a quick aside, what a pull list is for people who don't read comics, essentially you go to your local comic book shop and you say, these are the comics that I want to read. Can you have them all set out in a little pile for me every time I come once a month or once every couple of weeks to pick them up? And that's all it is. It's just to make it easier for the consumer. And also so comic book retailers know how much to purchase in terms of stock. Anyway, #1 titles always sell well because people want to collect them in case it blows up. And #2s, well, they tend to be shit. And they always seem a massive drop in sales just because they're not collectible as much anymore. With this massive inundation of #1 titles renumbering, it's almost like Marvel is banking on #1 sales somehow being profitable enough alone to float their business, which is absurd. So we've got lots and lots and lots of new titles in a very short period of time, which can cause a kind of reader fatigue, and keeps lots of books, as I said, off of pull lists. All of these new characters, additionally, need time to gather and garner fans. And worst of all, there's just this garbage tier writing to top all of this off. And the writing we're seeing from Marvel is garbage. Comics don't have a diversity problem, Marvel. They have a writing problem, and Marvel has a horribly mismanaged publication problem. By the way, not only is there an issue with new characters, because many of these characters, as I've said, are new, they are also oft taking on the mantles of fan-favorite, iconic characters, and like I said, that can work and has many times, but it does require a bit of sensitivity and finesse. For example, I know not everyone likes Miles Morales, but the way that Peter Parker died in Ultimate Spider-Man was an astounding send-off to the character, and a transition to the Black Latino Spider-Man was a lot less painful for fans than it would have been if Peter Parker had died screaming Allahu Akbar while flying a plane into a building or some other equally heinous shit. Peter's death was heroic and emotional. Compare that now, moving forward to Marvel, to Sam, Falcon, in a position as Captain America, something that no comic book reader I know would ever have given half a damn about outside of this event's context, after Steve Rogers, this Steve Rogers, essentially came out as a super secret Nazi sleeper agent his entire life. And hysterically, Marvel writers using the Red Skull as a Trump analog and subsequently making him sound incredibly reasonable and likable. Well, Marvel writer, I don't even know who you are, nor do I care to look you up.
Please, I don't know you, and I don't care to know you. I don't know you, and I don't care to know you. I don't know you, and I don't care to know you.
But I just have to say, mwah, ooh, it's delicious. It's perfect. Thank you for making this allegory, because it's great. My compliments to the chef. People who read comic books, we understand there are these complex relationships between characters like Sam, Steve, Clint, Bucky, etc. For example, Bucky was Captain America before and nobody gave a shit. Having Sam take on the mantle of Captain America actually makes a lot of sense since he and Steve are friends. Clint, another one of Steve's best friends, probably respects Cap too much to take on the mantle, to take on the uniform. In contrast, Sam's got a little bit more of his shit together and is a logical choice to wear the stars and stripes. Like I said, for those of us who actually read this shit, we don't care if a black man, if Sam, Falcon, our old friend who we have known for decades, is Captain America. I am a massive Daredevil fan, if it hasn't been very obvious. And T'Challa, yeah, the Black Panther, that black dude, took over for him for a while. Well, nobody gave a damn. When a new or different character takes on an existing character's mantle, comic readers don't care about the color of that new character's skin. We care about whether or not they're a good character. Even if we dislike the change, we all know this, that this too shall pass. No one cares about Miss America being a Latina if it has nothing to do with her character. No one cares about other young Avenger Hulkling being gay in 2012, just like no one cares that Richter is gay. No one cares if the writing is good! And the change of the cowl, in the case of characters changing over monikers, is well handled. No one cares. No one who reads this shit. That also doesn't mean, by the way, that you have to gently tiptoe around these characters like they're made of glass or porcelain with little kid gloves on, if that's how I'm coming off. Let's look back at Jaime Reyes again. Ted Kord, my nigga, R.I.P. in peace. Oh, he's back now, actually, we're cool. He died in a way that infuriated DC fans and fans of the bestest bros in the DC universe. But the comics themselves maintained awareness of how much it pissed people off, including this scene at Ted's funeral, where Booster Gold castigates the Justice League for being virtue-signaling cunts who never gave a flying fuck about Ted, and they're all standing here with their heads down and dour faces pretending to mourn his death. The scene gives me chills, still does. It's so great, it's perfect. So, when they brought back the Blue Beetle, as a teenage Latino boy, going from a middle-aged chubby scientist, Ted Kord, if it really was that comics are so anti-diversity, certainly everyone would have hated this replacement, coming out of the controversial death of the most popular holder of the namesake of Blue Beetle, Ted himself not being the first, right? We all hated this Jaime kid, yeah? Wrong. Everyone I know who has read this run loves it. And part of it works because of Booster, who has, at this point, lost his best friend and his ultimate bromance, and he is now in this very uncomfortable position of essentially becoming a mentor to the boy who holds the same mantle as his bromance. And the boy himself is very interesting, with a great cast of friends and family to back him up. Do you see why that's interesting? Why that's something we want to read? 'Cause it's fun. It's entertaining. So overall, do you guys understand what I'm talking about here? Writing is what allows this kind of passing of the mantle to work. It's not about new characters. It's not about what color skin they have. It's not about being male or female or trans or gay or anything. It's about being well written and well handled. The female Thor that has become so infamous because of shit like this, she's not a new character at all. She's pretty much the oldest Thor character besides the dude himself. She's Jane Foster. Yeah, it's this bitch. And you know what makes this force horrific Panther Pandering even worse? Because there is already a, quote, feminist female Thor that's been around for, ooh, let me look at my watch here, 40 years! This is her! Her name is Valkyrie. Recent writing has given her some more women power type dialogue, but honestly, it works out okay for her character. It makes sense for who she is. The feminist writing makes no sense for Jane Foster, even if she is Thor. You know who else has been Thor? Well, it's Aurora Monroe, Storm, a black woman, and yes, I loved when that happened. Also, I ship it. Comic readers do not care who is currently Thor, because even if we dislike whoever replaces the character, we also know that the core of the character will eventually come back, and we can just sit back and enjoy any good writing that comes out of the present change. But there is no good writing here. This is painful to read, and has often been outright insulting to the characters being replaced. I don't really have any issue with Ironheart, for example, the new female Iron Man, because her reason for taking up the mantle was Tony being in a coma. Hey, that makes sense. As I said, she's not even calling herself Iron Man, she's calling herself Ironheart. Who gives a shit? I just need the writing to be tolerable, Marvel. How can you have shit like Vision come out at the same time that you publish this trash? Like I said, when I see everyone lose their minds over this, either claiming that all comic book readers are racist, sexist, awful pieces of shit, or in this case, that they are racist, sexist pieces of shit, but also that diversity is simultaneously also successful because all of the women who read comics? Yes, since we're only interested in comics with black, female, disabled, lesbian leads. Sure, okay, regardless of how good the writing is. Yeah, as a woman, that's what I'm really looking for. Thank you! This video that V put up yesterday or the day before, depending on when I get this done, I also checked it out, and it states that women are 40% of comic book readers. Oh, honey. I call bullshit. Have they ever bought a comic in their life? Or gone to a comic book convention? Or maybe been into a comic book shop once? Sure. But I have been going to comic book shops on the weekly since 2010, and while I can't speak for digital sales, obviously, it is very, very rare to see another girl in my LCS. In that time, I have lived in 3 different cities, so it's not just a regional thing either. And as such, I'm a bit suspicious of this data. I will have to look into it more if I do find that this is legitimate and that the study appears to be well conducted. After I get a ability to look at it, I will make a correction. If it is true though, and all that matters is diversity, why is Marvel in the tank while DC appears to be doing so well? Well, because DC, which also flirted with this SJW bullshit, and which for years put a lot of beloved legacy characters, by the way, and by that I mean not the original white characters of 1932, but the characters who subsequently replaced them, into an interdimensional prison cell outside of the main DC universe, well, they've been bringing those back. They've been bringing back beloved characters like Kyle Rayner, like Ted Kord, while keeping Jaime. Like, bringing back Wally West. DC is listening to their fans, and is focusing on writing, not on social justice rhetoric, and it is being reflected in their sales. So let me try to wrap this up, as I know this is long as hell, and I've been all over the place in this video. For once, technically, social justice warriors are correct, in that diversity of characters is not what's killing Marvel's sales, but it's writing that panders to them that certainly is. Comic book readers, for the most part, we want to read good comics. Sometimes some people will, yes, just pick up books because they like a certain character. That's why Spider-Man and Batman will always sell. But the majority of comic book readers, we just want to read something entertaining while we look at interesting and attractive art and characters. Now, it is possible sometimes for those desires to overlap as well. For example, I was so excited for the Mockingbird series because I love Bobby Morse, and I'm sure 99.9% of my non-comic book reading audience has no freaking clue who Bobby Morse is or who Mockingbird is, because she is a D-lister at best who got her own ongoing series last year. She is most famous for being Hawkeye's wife for a while and a West Coast Avenger. Yeah, astounding credentials, right? So when I saw she was getting a book, I was ecstatic, and the first few issues were pretty great, but then all of a sudden this weird feminist narrative trash started seeping through the cracks, and I just had to shelve it. Listen, how many people out there are fans of Bobby Morse, Marvel? A couple of hundred at the most. And what kind of demographic are those people? Oh, maybe probably people who enjoy the 1970s West Coast Avengers, Do you think those people want to read feminist bullshit schlock with no purpose? Who else would be interested in this book, Marvel? Someone just interested in the cover? Or maybe the writer? Well, if they're into writing, then this isn't going to appeal to them either, because the writing is shit. So you're banking on what? Art? and hope that maybe there is some social justice warriors who will flock to this book to support a book starring a woman. Too bad she's white, but the truth is, we've seen this in video games, and we are seeing it now with Marvel. Social justice shit alone does not sell. Diverse characters do sell, but social justice rigmarole does not, for every reason I have just rambled on about here. And to David Gabriel, when retailers told you that they didn't like diversity, either they expressed themselves poorly or you misunderstood. It is not the characters themselves because of the color of their skin or their gender or their sexuality that is killing sales. It is the characters being horribly written and the dialogue being intolerable, social justice warrior pandering that appeals to no one who buys comics. To the social justice warriors, the feminists, and the leftists now claiming that promoting diversity is profitable, you're right, it is, when it makes sense. You are talking about weirdo nerds who love characters like the X-Men, an allegory for segregation and racism. Superman, as you like to state every once in a while, and this video in particular, was created by two Jews who got royally Jewed, funnily enough, or not funnily, it's actually quite sad, out of their creation and died pretty much destitute. You're already looking at a pretty accepting group of readers. And you have to understand, ladies, comic books were massively censored under the Comics Code Authority for decades, and in the 70s through the 80s we saw a massive explosion of new, diverse characters reflecting the changes we were seeing in society. Like gamers, we're not racist, we're not sexist, or whatever you think we are. Generally speaking, that's because we're part of our own minority. We're a minority that doesn't have things like affirmative action either. There is no special treatment for our kind of social outcast. That's why we're reading about other social outcasts. Do you know why Daredevil is my favorite comic book character? Because the idea of a blind man who gets special powers that allow him to overcome problems that he faces with his blindness, to not just help others through his work as a defense attorney, but by physically fighting thugs and criminals in his shitty hometown neighborhood that he could easily afford to leave, all while dripping with self-loathing and Catholic guilt. Whew! That's what I want, lads. Suffering and overcoming adversity. And, I mean, that's what it means to be an American citizen, isn't it? Right? Not the suffering bit, but the overcoming any and all adversity. No matter what's thrown at you, you will find a way to excel and succeed. You can. Because this is America. These new characters, or these new versions of characters, they don't reflect any of that. It's empty, meaningless trash. It's not just Daredevil. Look at any major popular character. And if they're really beloved, generally speaking, they have to overcome something pretty hard in their lives. That's what makes superheroes and characters in general interesting. If you look at the hero's journey, the work of Joseph Campbell, the darkest part of the hero's myth comes right before the dawn. They have to face some sort of challenge or adversity in order to truly be a hero. That is what makes these figures mythological to us as a human species. You can find stories of heroes in pretty much every single human culture. We hate to see our heroes fail and fall, but we also need that in order to form our connection with them. Even Kamala Khan, who is adored by social justice warriors and who I actually like as well. She is a very safe character, given that her Muslim family is very Western and as such is a pretty inaccurate portrayal of many first-generation Muslim immigrant families. Not all, of course, but many. As a last point on this, and yes, I know we are getting long as fuck, comics are a very unique form of media, and I am very interested in them from a social science perspective and a research perspective. I do a whole panel on this sort of thing where I talk about the research behind comic books and sequential art. Anyway, one last time. Diversity itself is not the problem. Comic book readers, we have no problem with diverse characters. The issue is writing, and having terrible writing will make men and women of all races drop your shitty book. Sort yourselves out, Marvel. Take a look at DC and what's making them money from comics while yours flounder. The answer's simple. Drop the narrative. Write interesting comics. Hire talented writers. Stop this bullshit. It doesn't work. And ultimately, it's going to kill your brand, at least in terms of comic books. Oh, and real quick, as one last aside, because Marvel's delightful obsession with diversity over quality was thrust back into the news the other day, as a Twitter user pointed out several references to anti-Christian and anti-Semitic Quranic verses in X-Men Gold #1, illustrated by Indonesian artist Ardian Syaf, as a form of protest against the Christian governor of Jakarta. Basically, this video was pretty much done, and then this happened, and then I needed to add a little something about it. Anyway, the primary source of this criticism is this scene, with Peter, Colossus, wearing a t-shirt that says QS 551, meaning Quran Surah 551, which is translated as such. O you who have believed, do not take the Jews and the Christians as allies. They are, in fact, allies of one another, and whoever is an ally to them among you, then indeed he is one of them. Indeed, Allah guides not the wrongdoing people. In other words, any Muslim who allies himself with the infidel, the kafir, is as bad as the infidel themselves. Again, this particular verse is being used to incite protests against the Jakartan governor by asserting that any support for him is the equivalent of being a dirty infidel yourself. And people wonder why Muslims don't seem to be integrating so well in Europe, preferring instead to self-ghettoize in places like Rinkeby, Sweden, where they can self-police with their own Sharia law. Oh, and I'm about to talk about Sweden very soon, friends. Anyway, so Marvel went ahead and canned Siaf and made a short, apologetic little statement, but it was just impossible for me to not mention this in this video. See what happens when you choose pandering over quality, Marvel? And by the way, I'm not saying that this bloke's art is particularly bad. It's almost painfully average. But when you choose pandering, you're gonna end up with nutbags like this dude working for you who have really every good reason to believe that your comics are the perfect place to slide in political messages, no matter how extreme. I mean, you do it everywhere else with your forced social justice garbage. Who can even blame Ardian for thinking you might appreciate just a little bit more Islamic cultural enrichment in your comic books? And by the way, you know that if that Surahverse didn't include the bit about the Jews, that no one at Marvel would have lifted a finger over this. Because, as we know, all Christians are white colonialists who enslaved the earth and enslaved all other human people and have never done anything good at all, just as they have never been persecuted. Wait. Forget that. Right, silly me. Just forget that. Thinking you can discriminate against Christians. What was I thinking? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, Altana Volt.